Welcome to Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case, the podcast where we take questions I've been asked in the past from so many different roles, along with questions you'll ask and we'll ask together to, learn. Along the way, we'll build our capacity to become a community of problem solvers. I'm your host, Janice Case. Let's get to it, shall we? All right, welcome everyone to Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case. I'm joined, of course, by the fabulous Melissa Ellis. Melissa, I don't know about you, but I feel like we got to part 4 of this series in a flash, and yet it feels like forever ago since we had our first conversation with Michelle and Lisa, right?
Absolutely, and I think it went by so fast because it's so interesting.
Well, yeah.
But it feels like forever ago because there's so much information in these four parts. It's really amazing to me how much information we've gotten in the first 3.
Yep.
And then, what I'm looking forward to in this last and final piece.
Yeah, I think you captured it. That's exactly right. So before we go into the formal intro here, let's give the COVID update, right? We're at least, so here in California, I counted up, we're officially 38 days into our mandated stay-at-home existence. Last week, you and I both talked about the importance of it being okay to just survive and make it through every day. So what's your update? What's happening for you?
I don't want to say I'm getting used to it because this has kind of always been my life in terms of being a bit introverted. I'm not really one that feels the need to go out a lot. Like that hasn't been the struggle for me. The struggle for me has been, as we've talked about, the working from home piece of it.
Yep.
And being able to keep those things as compartmentalized as I did before.
Yeah.
Before, once I left the job, I left work.
Yep.
Now, every time I go into the room I've kind of made into a makeshift office, I'm tempted to get online and check something or respond to an email. And I'm working, or I've been working on that balance. So I think it's baby steps, but steps nonetheless.
Yeah,
good. Taking some steps.
I'm glad to hear that. And of course, we have the luxury of spying on each other on social media in between. And I feel like I've seen that this week, just a little bit more like getting there. Good. On my end, and I just got off, actually I did a live video about this just a little bit ago. I'm trying to start shifting myself into a survive and maybe thrive just a bit, right? Yeah. So, I definitely want to celebrate any and everyone who's just making it through each day, because kudos, right? That's huge. And I also want to support the idea that this many weeks in, maybe this could be a good time to say, okay, so what are the structures that I've put into place to ensure that every day isn't the same uphill battle, right? Because we're putting structures in place, whether we're knowingly doing it or just kind of doing it, but to step back and examine, all right, what have I done? And then to what extent, can I build on that so that the strengths that I bring to the table, because each of us brings unique strengths to the table, help me begin to thrive in this new reality. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I loved it. I actually watched the live. I caught it after, but I did watch it. And I loved it. And what it actually kind of shifted my thought process too.
Okay.
Because I have been very focused on just get through it. Get through it. But the truth is that we may not get through it because this may become more of our old normal.
Amen.
This may become the new normal to some degree anyway, even if not as severe as it has been. So it really made me stop and think that I do need to focus on finding a way to strive. I mean, to thrive through it all, like to actually come out on the other side of it, whatever that other side looks like, feeling like I've accomplished something, even if it's something as simple as journaling every day or, whatever.
Yep.
But I definitely agree with you that it's, like I said, I just don't want people to think that our message of, if all you can do, get through it. Absolutely, if that's all you can do.
Of course.
But I think a lot of us are capable of doing a bit more than that. And we're kind of letting the mental pressures and the societal pressures and all of that maybe stand in our way of viewing it that way. So I was grateful for your live.
That's well, thank you for saying that. That's a really great way to put it, though. And I would say, I think you're right. I think and I would actually wager that all of us in some way are capable of it, right? And maybe it's a great time to stop and ask the people around you, right? Your friends, your family, virtually, like, what have you seen me do? Like, for example, I've seen you you shifted into making this makeshift office space, kind of separating your workspace now from your home space. And now I hear you saying you try to only go in there when you have to work and you're resisting it. So you're putting structures in place. That's a really wonderful example. Sometimes we need other people to point it out to us, right? Like we don't even realize it. So that, yeah, like you said, because I think you made such a really important point that the whole notion of getting through it suggests there's an end in sight where we're going to turn to where it always was, and we're never going to return there. So how do we, kind of learn what we can from it, right, as we move forward?
Exactly.
So we said, of course, 4 weeks ago that when we introduced this series that it was a bizarre coincidence that it's occurring right now in the midst of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't have known all the times over the years that somebody asked me about supporting children who experience trauma that this podcast would come at a time when we are collectively experiencing trauma. So all the more reason that I know this final episode in this series, well, at least for now, because I have no doubt we're coming back to trauma, is going to resonate with folks. So Sabrina Drescher, right, is just a remarkable young woman. And I hope in this conversation to simply create a platform for her story. I'm not going into it with any preconceived notions about where we'll get, but rather with only kind of a belief that her story in and of itself, however she tells it, is going to bring a perspective to parents and educators and anyone else out there supporting kids that will help them provide all that our kids need to, again, not just survive, but thrive. So with that, let's meet Sabrina. Let's get to it. All right, Sabrina, it is so great to have you join us. I have a feeling that this conversation, falling kind of fourth in line in this series of 4 different conversations, is really going to help kind of bring all the learning we've done in the first 3 episodes of this series. It's going to pull it all together. So thank you so much for being here. It's just awesome that you're willing to be vulnerable with us. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, so are we. So here's, we're going to start with the obvious. I want you to, you're here because we've been talking all along about how to support kids who've experienced trauma. And now as a young adult, you're here to talk to us a little bit about how you experienced trauma across your childhood, how it affected you, what the folks did to support you. We're going to get to all of those pieces. So, start out by introducing yourself and then just lead us down the road, right? As far as kind of what you feel like we need to know to help situate your story.
Yeah, of course. And feel free to stop me and redirect me. And
you got it.
You know how it is.
Absolutely.
I think of the word, I still to this day have like a tough relationship with the word trauma, just like, as I'm sure most people, like, confronting that with yourself, and then also like in comparison to other people, you're like, well, this is valid and this is not valid. And so I I'm slowly getting to terms with just like using it in I don't know what way, but a way that is comfortable for me, that also helps me see my life from like a realistic perspective.
Sure.
And it has helped a lot to identify like what I've gone through as not being one super traumatic event, but as it being just like a lot of little small things. And like as each thing happens, it kind of spirals into, once like one experience occurs, that then influences how I see the upcoming experiences. And like this constant fear of the same thing happening again is what's really kind of like shaped a lot of my experience. And like my relationship to control and stuff has been affected by that, like fear that this bad thing might happen again, or constantly trying to prevent these negative experiences or experiences of discomfort. And they all, the more that like one bad thing happens and then that bad thing makes another like medium bad thing feel much worse. I don't know. It's like this, it's super cumulative. And so I've like gone through a lot of like really, like I would just say just like a lot of accumulating smaller things that just like they all kind of start to interact with each other, and they all start to just like, influence and come into dialogue. And I'm like, well, if this thing happens, then that changed this thing. And, and so I'd say like a lot of my experiences are with, smaller things that like would kind of fly under the radar as not being super traumatic, but then when you add it all together and look at it, and I come into my therapist and give her the full thing, she's like, you've gone through some stuff. And I'm like, really? What? No.
There you go. Having it validated. Well, let me tell you what you've already done. You've already really brought home how we've been defining trauma since we started the series. And we started the series with a couple of social workers who said, look, trauma is almost never one thing. It's not an event, right? It's how somebody experiences what happens to them over time. So you just nailed that down for us, and kind of what that feels like, from your experience. And you also have already circled back to something we talked about early on too, which is this idea that right out of the gate we have to understand we can't compare. Right? That my experience with something, you and I could experience the exact same thing, and it could be more traumatic to me than you, or vice versa, because it's our experience with it, right? So I love that you just did that, and we didn't even plan it. It just happened. Love that.
Yeah, I find it very grounding to remember that everybody feels emotions the same. Like that, a deep, deep sadness, no matter what the cause is felt to the same intensity. Yeah. Like people can feel the same intensity of emotions from completely different experiences.
Yes.
That helps me a lot of but this person, but it's so on the context, and that's definitely something that's helped me too. And just reworking this, it's not this super, it's so not black and white.
Yeah.
And it's not a thing that you can clearly mark with a timeline, but it's one that holistically looking at it, you're like, this is more serious, or this is, I don't know.
Well, your therapist saying to you, yeah, you've been through some stuff, and you're like, wait, I have? Oh yeah, I guess I have, right?
Right? Or being so I think we're going to do some trauma therapy, and I'm like, really? Who, me? But it is so much more validating, and to and I also appreciate the not labeling it as oh, so you are very I think the dialogue around it has been let's not identify it as you are a traumatized person, but you have gone through some things that you would consider trauma, and you have collected traumatic events, or going away from you have PTSD, you have been sorry about your terrible life, and more you have a lot of experiences that have done this, and so I think therapists have helped me look at it realistically, validating what was experienced as being bad without labeling it as this horrible event, or telling me that I don't know, without telling me what my feelings are. They have helped me just see that these things are worse, and the way that I've perceived them is the thing that we have to deal with. We can't change what happened, but we just have to change kind of how we're perceiving them, and how we eliminate them from how my relationship to it, I think. Is just
how you move forward with it. So tell us a little bit, back up a little bit, because you've referred to the stuff that's happened, etc. And obviously, we've heard from your mom, right? That's kind of been a really crucial part of this. And you're last on purpose by design, friend. So so we certainly have some of your stories, so to speak, from her, but I want you to tell your story from you. So what are some of the things that you, especially as you've worked with therapists, that you look back on and you say, okay, here are the series of things that occurred that, when you put them all together, that was some heavy duty stuff.
Yeah, I think it's the pivotal moments.
Yes.
So I would start with when I was 4 years old. Mm-hmm. I was diagnosed with Marfan syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder, genetic, and we got really lucky that a doctor recognized it in me. And I would say my parents both acted on it so quickly. So props to them on just the fact that I got diagnosed at 4 is without any family history of it is pretty incredible.
Okay.
Because a lot of people will go undiagnosed with it. And it's really, it's one of those things where only 20% of the people who get it don't have any family history of it, okay, and don't have any relatives that have it, and I didn't have any diagnosed other than before great grandparents and stuff. Sure. So for my parents to find that out was so saving for my entire kind of future, was for them to see to trust a doctor that said, hey, you should go check this person out, go get another opinion. And, okay, I was little, so I could probably be saying these all, maybe this didn't happen or whatever.
Sure.
But I do know that it was a big, big, amazing thing to have known about it for such a long time.
Okay.
However, also when you're diagnosed with told that you have a bubble in your heart that might explode as a child, it makes some anxiety.
A little bit.
So you just like start to learn that, oh, I might be in danger, or like, like maybe my parents are very concerned about me for a specific reason. Why are they so nervous? Like, why are people afraid around me? Like, right. I don't feel anything, because like that's the other thing, is an aortic aneurysm is the main part that is like, it's the danger, but you don't feel an aneurysm.
Sure.
You just like are told that you have it, and so it's it's super just like generative of anxiety to be told as a child that you have a little time bomb in your chest.
Yeah,
seriously. Don't get it too hard. So I think like that knowledge alone, and that being told that by doctors alone, was just enough to make a person very, like, it is. I mean, and it was a valid form of like, I am, anxious and nervous, and my life is technically in danger.
Sure.
And I don't know what to do about it. So I had that. Had like, because of the Marfans, like, that led to a lot of just like weird doctor medical experiences. I did like this hormone therapy when I was like 10. And so there was a lot of fear of like, your body is very destroyed, or like not even destroyed, but just like, ooh, we need to make sure that your body doesn't, like, we need to control your body in the sense of, we need to not let it get too tall. We need to not let the aorta get too large. We need to measure you here and measure you here, and point out all of the ways that your body is deformed, and all the ways that you would qualify as having a disability, not even a disability, but just like having this genetic disorder.
Sure.
So let's go highlight all of your mutations.
Right.
So it just like, from a medical perspective, it's not very humanizing to just like go through diagnoses. However, it's important, and it's like, it is important also to remain pretty neutral in diagnosing them. But what happens is you get a lot of numbers, you get a lot of, highlights of like, here, if you look at your wrist and how it bends this way, that means that you have this. And, it's very scary to look at online and to Google a thing that you've been diagnosed.
Oh my gosh, especially at that age, right? Like, you're,
But I was so young. I was so not really like, it wasn't a thing of like me consciously being aware of like, you have been dying. It wasn't that kind of, it was more of like, everyone around me in my environment was scared and anxious, and I was like,
you sense that, of course.
And then as I grew up, like, I learned how to say it. It's like, I didn't even know what Marfan's was, and I was like, oh, I have a bubble above my heart, and like, that's what I said for a really long time, but like, I didn't really understand that. So just like, as I grew up, was growing up with this knowledge and with this like perspective on my life that was, you're abnormal, something is puts you in danger and makes you different, and you have to sit out during PE, and you can't go run outside, and you can't do this, and you can't do this, and normal, you're not normal,
right?
So I mean, I think, and anybody who's just, when you're a child and you're diagnosed with something that makes you identifiably different, it's going to change the way that you see yourself, and it's going to snowball.
So what's so important about that, Sabrina, I'll interject really quickly, is that, we wouldn't often necessarily think about a child having a diagnosis of anything, blank, right? The thing that makes them different, to your point, as being a child then who, as a result, has experienced some level of trauma. And I know you're going to share some other things too, but even just that alone, I think, is really revealing for parents, and especially for educators, right? To think about like, okay, I have this kid in my class who's diagnosed with ADHD, something more common, right? I don't think about that in terms of the emotional experience he or she has with that, and their understanding of that and how it makes them different. That's a really important thing for folks to kind of reflect on after this conversation.
Yeah. I think it's like things that isolate you and make you feel like you do not have control over something.
Sure.
We're doing this, like, this is my trauma, like, kind of therapy that I'm doing right now. It's like, the identifiers are like, I'm not in control. I am, helpless, or I am, those feelings that isolate you and make you feel like you don't have control over your body or over your scenarios. Those are what kind of really, those feelings, like when they get planted as a seed of like, oh, I don't have control over my body, that seed grows into a giant garden.
Of course.
But, so I would say that is very accurate.
So you have the diagnosis. And as a result of that, you're having these experiences. You've used the word anxiety. That obviously it makes you very anxious. You start to have some of those kinds of symptoms, if you will, etc. What are other things that are things that now, when you look back, as far as your therapy goes, etc., that you say kind of are layered, right, with that or alongside that?
Yeah. So first I had the diagnosis. Then I had my parents were divorced, and we moved.
Yep.
And we moved to Virginia. And I was able to go to Johns Hopkins for medical treatment, which is a very, very big and very intimidating hospital.
Sure.
And, as we moved, parents got divorced, new children were, like, my brother was born like a year, I can't remember how old my brother was when my parents got divorced, but he was really young.
Yeah.
And I was the oldest of my two siblings. And they got divorced, new school, family, stability is not there. So there's no school stability, there's no family stability. And when I say there's none, there is, the cases are all different.
Of course.
But in my childhood eyes, I was like, literally I have control over nothing. I was like, my body is in danger, my family is, breaking, and I'm in a completely new school. So when you move, you have no friends. So I didn't have any source of safety and control in my environment or with my body because of all of these different things. And so there was nowhere for me to turn that was like, oh, okay, at least this is a safe place. Because because I had no control over all of these changes and all of these different, just like changing factors, new school, life, new everything. Yeah. Friends, I was an awkward kid, the whole package. And so, had to adjust to all of that, to my parents getting remarried very quickly, which I'm still, like, my parents' divorce was a very, like, I don't identify with people who, like, really went through it with a divorce. It's a really, like, fortunate scenario where I have now 4 parents who are just, like, all supportive. And I would say the thing that brings them all together the most is my health. Mm-hmm. And they are always, like, if they are like, I think the times that they have all worked the most cohesively and effectively has always been when my life's in crisis, and they're all like, okay, let's go. And
which is really unfortunate, but thank goodness, right? Like, thank goodness it wasn't the opposite. So yeah,
exactly. It doesn't tear them apart. It brings them together. It doesn't make them be like, oh, well, you did. They all, like, really quickly prioritized my health and my siblings' health. And so the divorce, like, it was startling, and it was, chaotic, and there was points of conflict as anything would happen. And so as a little girl, like, I was aware of the conflict, and aware that, like, 2 people that I'm supposed to love both don't like each other. Yeah. But on that, the remarriages, like, my step-parents are so great. Everyone is so supportive, but I do, like, it, like, split my relationships of, like, I have 2 parents, I have 4 parents, and they all do something different. Oh, sure. So they all have a very different role, and they all have supported me in different ways. And, I would go to one person for one thing, and I would go to another one for another. And like, I think that really has been super, just, like, really great. I would much rather have 4 happy parents than 2 unhappy. Yeah. Like, so, like, now it's great. It's super awesome now. And, that doesn't take away. They're always going to be, of course, kerfuffle. But overall, looking back, the divorce, although it was really stressful, and it was really anxiety inducing. Of course. But it was not a bad outcome.
It could have been worse, which is good.
It could have been worse.
It's good that you can reflect on that.
Change like that, it is going to be rocky, and I was just aware that there was tension between my parents. And I think that I got super just, like, conflict. I really hated conflict, and I hated that confrontation, and I started to hate, like, and really fear confrontation and conflicts, and, like, wanted that to always go away. Yeah. And so my relationship with, like, that conflict was, like, that's another seed that, like, starts getting planted, and, like, starts to every time it gets water, it just gets bigger and bigger. Yep. And then I had because we were really worried about I always go out of order, but I dislocated my knee then when I was about 10 years old. And that was traumatic in a way that it was just like a really scary thing to see my body completely deformed in one space. You know, I fall, I hear this pop, and I look and see my knee, and my kneecap is not where it was supposed to be. And so seeing your body in that kind of deformity was like really startling, and really uncomfortable, obviously, painful, and then super swollen. And, you know, the same way that any scary thing feels is like emotions are intense. I am looking at my leg and I'm in pain, and I'm like, I don't know what's happening, and blah, blah, blah. I'm 10 years old. My kneecap is in my thigh. And
right. Oh my gosh.
My dad is freaking out. It's dark. We're on this family trip, and all of a sudden things have gone wrong, and now we're going to the hospital. But yeah, I was like, what's gonna happen to me? And my dad is freaking out, and I'm like, oh no, dad is losing it. Like, oh God. And when everybody panics around you once again, it becomes very scary.
Gosh.
And it's a lot of back and forths and trying to figure out how to deal with this knee. So it ended up being a surgery. I ended up like a couple days later having a surgery, and they sewed it back together, but they casted it up wrong. So it was hyperextended because of my Marfan's and everything, and my knee, the cast was super hyperextended, and so like they did that wrong, and like that was painful, and so it was several weeks of really deep discomfort. And I had also just started at a new school, and then I was the girl on crutches for the whole year, which was super awesome for making friends.
Oh my gosh!
And I was like 5'11", and in 5th grade or something, I was a very tall in 5th grade.
So you kind of stood out a little bit, is what the image I have in my head is a 5th grader who's absolutely standing out now, right? You're 5'11", you've got a cash, you're on the crutches.
I don't remember what height I was in 5th grade, but I was a head and shoulders taller than everybody else, and growing so fast, and because I was growing so fast, I was eating so much food, and was like just so much change, so much, and so I am in the new school. I'm like a 1.5 feet taller than everybody, and I'm growing really fast, and my knee is doing this thing, and so I can't participate in gym. So like this idea of like kind of activities and being normal and like fitting in was just not an option. So like seeing yourself in an isolated state was just like, oh, I'm different, like something's wrong, like it's super isolating. So I just like got feeling of like not having control and isolation. These are all just like seeds, and they're all coming in, and they're all like, and then in my head I'm like, oh, I'm out of, like, I don't have control over things, and then it starts to affect the way that I see all of the things that I'm doing. It affects the way that I see my body. It affects the way that I see my relationships. It affects the way that I see, activity. Like, my relationship with activity was really tough because I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things because I didn't want to pop the aorta in my chest. And being monitored and being touched by doctors of them being like, we need to take your blood, we need to do, you need to wear a nightgown all the time. And so then I was growing really fast. After I recovered from the surgery, this is probably like I'm about to start middle school. And the doctors are like very unsure of how tall I'm going to be. And so my growth plates aren't closing, and they're like predicting me to be like 6'8". And my mom was just like, no, thank you.
Oh, wow.
That is not good. And good call on her move. Would not have been like, being 6'8" would have been so many different levels of crazy. Definitely not healthy. And so we found a doctor that, an endocrinologist at Johns Hopkins, this like old French doctor, who was like, old doctors that kind of give you the heebie-jeebies. They're harmless, but he's like 80 bajillion years old, and like telling me about the baskets in my or the eggs in my basket, and I'm like, I'm not comfortable with this. I'm already uncomfortable with like my gender and like being a giant now. So please don't. And I'm going like I'm starting to go through puberty, and it's just embarrassment. But they start doing this hormonal therapy for me that stunts my growth, and so I was supposed to get my period at like 15 and I got it at 11.
Oh,
and
wow.
when I was when I was in 6th grade, I suddenly grew another like 6. It makes it so that you speed up your growth, you get your period, and then you stop.
Ah, okay.
So it speeds it up and stops it short. And it's not done that frequently, but I'm 6'4", not 6'8", so
yeah,
something must have worked.
Sure.
Or I was just never going to be 6'8", but it doesn't matter. So I was being told that I was artificially getting my period at 11, and just like was like jumpstart, hit puberty, and grew so many inches in 6th grade. I know that I think I reached 6'4" in 6th grade. I could be wrong.
That's okay.
I could have gone to like 6'2".
Right.
I definitely was over 6 feet, and was like somewhere in like the only kid taller than me at that point was Tim Settle, who now plays for the Redskins.
Oh, jeez. That's a great comparison.
So shout out to Big Tim.
Amen to that. That's so funny.
He and I were the only 2 tall kids at
Thank goodness for him, right? You're like, I'm not the tallest. Yay.
Yeah, he was like, oh, you're tall. Like, it was always a thing. So, yeah, and so there's just, the classic, just, I'm different, I'm 6'4", people tell me that I sound like a boy, and I can't play sports, and that's the one thing that would have been, validating for my height and for all this stuff was like, at least she's good at basketball, blah, 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 and I was like, I have a medical condition, I can't do any sports.
Yeah.
And so the therapy, I don't know what it did to, like, I was taking birth control, but I have no idea what it did to my, like, mental elements in terms of, like, who knows? Nobody did any, like, excessive testing on what that would do to your mental health. And nobody at this time at all was like, hey, we should make sure that, like, she's not depressed or anxious. Right. But yeah, so I learned a lot of coping with self-control and coping with my body by controlling food. However, that didn't really start until I got permission to swim.
Okay.
I would say I really, really, really wanted to play sports for normalcy, for fitting in, for my whole family plays sports. And yeah, I was like, I dreamt of swimming. I saw my brothers do it and I was like, this will be so cool to do. I could just be like these other kids, And also, so I really, had this really big desire to convince my doctors to let me swim. And I was like, it's safe, I swear. And they were like, you know what? Yeah, you can do it really slowly. Like you can do really monitored, really slow heart rate monitor swimming. And that was a super huge transformation, good and in bad, where I was just allowed to really work on swimming. I started dedicating a lot of energy to it. And really like the idea of like, oh, if you can do this in a healthy way where your heart is managed and your resting heart rate naturally will be lower. And so that's a really good thing for Marfan syndrome is to have a healthy heart. So it was good and it was amazing. However, I also just learned that I could control my food and I could control my fitness. Like I could work out more. And I also, because I was so anxious, and conflict avoidant, I absorbed, I kept all of my feelings and all of my anxiety inside of me.
Okay.
And so, or my mom might disagree with that one. She might think that I let it all out. I was also, but I think that is when it got into the malnourished phase. But yeah, so I started restricting, pretty quickly, after the hormone therapy, I would say. So the hormones, the hit puberty, started swimming and started restricting kind of at the same time. This was all an attempt to control my body and to have it fit in. I wanted it to be normal, or at least be to be able to do things like being disabled, quote unquote. Not, I have a weird relationship with that too, but knowing that I couldn't do certain things and wanting to prove that my body could do things that it was told it couldn't do. Got super into overachieving and everything. Oh, I also learned I was horrible in school because I had spent my first of all had ADHD. Second of all, spent my first I spent kindergarten to like 5th grade. Kindergarten to 3rd grade. I was learning math and science and French. I was not a fluent French speaker, and there's like a whole long thing about that. But I basically just like really didn't learn math and science and English.
Okay.
And was like kind of okay at French, but really not to the level of native speakers in Virginia when we moved there. And so I was just really behind in school and was constantly getting these like, I got tested for a learning disability, but like passed it because I got a 75 on the math exam. Which I guess would mean that I didn't have a learning disability or whatever.
Right.
And so they tested me, and I just really didn't focus in school at all. I had a really hard time. But as when I moved, I started in English learning, and I was so much better at school suddenly.
Funny how that works.
And the swimming helped me time manage a lot.
Yeah.
And the swimming created, because I had no time, I was finally able to get things done.
Sure.
And so my life became really, really structured. And this all comes in, I'm starting to control my food, I'm starting to control my school, and I have less time, and I'm just going and going and going. And, it was working. I, started losing weight, of course, because I'm growing and I'm swimming,
sure.
but your brain goes, associate certain things with being happier or more successful or better. And so I started restricting, I started controlling literally everything. Because that gave me security, it gave me safety, because I couldn't control the world around me. I learned to control my body and myself. Right. And, I wanted my body to look different, and I wanted I wanted to have perfect grades, wanted to be overachieving in everything to show that I wasn't any different. And if I was different, I was good different. Right. I was better than everybody else if I was going to be. And I really got really good at school. I'd always been doing art. And so it was planning, that was my trajectory, was art. And then I started really prioritizing swimming over art, because the swimming was this validating control, safety it offered all that stuff. Food also offered that stuff. Anything that offered me a sense of control over my body and a sense of safety in my body, and at the typical, all of the eating disorder thoughts were there, all of the body dysmorphia thoughts and body dysmorphia ruminations, and it just all was there. Just got pretty quick, but mostly it was from I would say I was eating a normal amount, but I was binging on exercise quite a bit. But the relationship, I was objectively, I was restricting a significant amount, and I was working out a significant amount.
And so that resulted in? That resulted in
when I was, and this is at this point too, my emotions are crazy. I'm 15 or 16.
So you got the normal teenage stuff going on and all this other.
Yeah. And I wasn't really my social life as a teenager wasn't really there, because I had put it all in swimming, school. I had kind of friends, but there wasn't just I just was so I was so controlling of everything, and I was really, really structured, which was, once again, super great for my grades. I had the best grades ever. Had really amazing, I was getting so much work done, and my body was I was working out so much. I woke up at 3:50 in the morning and swam every day I would swim in the mornings for an hour and a half, and then in the afternoons for 2 hours.
Wow.
And our team was super not great around the eating. They just they kind of messed up a bit for all of the swimmers, I think. And just balance was not an option for me. I was let's go all the way. Let's overachieve. Then everything gets worse and worse. And I think the main thing was that I was just so anxious, and I would freak out over the tiniest little thing, because I had control over everything. And so if anything got taken out of my control, it was that point of obtaining control over every single thing. If one thing went wrong, it was okay, canceled. Yeah. Let's lose all, if you're 10 minutes late to practice, canceled. Right. Freak out. And then because of malnourishment, it affects every part of your life. And so it was just, got really out of hand. And my parent, and I was, you know, in denial, and also like I was, you know, doing this to I would also say I was doing a lot of this to myself, and like, you know, and you know, guilt and shame and blah blah blah. I think all of the things you guys have probably talked about. And so my mom did the right thing by taking me to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, she knew that I would not go if I knew what was happening.
Sure.
So, you know, it was placed as being like, oh, we're just gonna go to the doctor and like see about this depression you keep telling me about, or like, why are your emotions so crazy? And we were really looking. She really went into it of like, it's not the body stuff, it's the your mind is like, you can't function right now. Like you are exploding every second of the day. And I'm watching you, and from a mother's perspective, watching a daughter harm herself in that way is got to be really fucking tough. Really tough. Sorry. Yeah. And so she, you know, I don't really know what how exactly it went about, but next thing I know is I'm in Johns Hopkins with these two very cold doctors looking at me and being like, we're diagnosing you with anorexia and depression and anxiety, blah, blah, blah. Here's a prescription for Zoloft. You're going into family therapy, and everything and what I'm hearing at least is your family has decided that you cannot do anything, so they are going to be taking over all of your food and all of your life. You're not allowed to swim, and everything that you have been doing the past 11 years, since you were 11, all of that control you've been slowly obtaining, we are taking it all away right now.
Gotcha.
And so they were like, you're going home, you're not swimming anymore, you are not, like, there was that huge loss. I lost all of the control. I was then, you know, not force-fed, but kind of force-fed in the sense of,
your mom described
it
that.
was because I didn't want to eat. Yeah. And they gave me no option, and the way it was done was not through. They were like, you can either do it in the hospital or you can do it by us. And, you know, it was what it was. They were doing their best, but it was super, super traumatizing to get that control taken away and to then be like, because like the food was my biggest fear was gaining weight and not having control over my food.
Yeah.
And that's what the eating disorder does.
Right.
And it makes it so that I basically in that moment had to face all of those biggest fears came true, where like I was suddenly had no control over my food, my life, or any of the things.
Yeah.
And no control over my body that was now going to start expanding.
Yep.
I couldn't swim, and everything that I ate hurt my body because my body had learned that food was unnecessary. You know, your body adapts, your body does crazy things. Like your body is really, really adaptive and really respond to things. I think that the introduction of all of that food at that point is what caused a lot of my allergies that I have now. Okay. Is like mass reintroduction of like peanut butter, wheat, soy. I had to drink those nasty shakes. It was so miserable.
Yeah.
But I also, right after, I had a huge wave of relief. When at the first day, like maybe it was the second day. It's pretty common, I think, for people with anorexia that you get this weird euphoric phase when you start eating enough and you finally like are like allowed to just like be for a second and you like kind of release that control. You get a really kind of I had a weird euphoric phase that then went into a very massive depression.
Right.
And I was also prescribed Zoloft really quickly. So, you know, they prescribed me that medication before, and like they prescribed it the same day that they diagnosed me, which like I get it, like to take the edge off, but like also like I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about them prescribing it so quickly.
Yeah.
And such a, I mean, yeah, I get it, but I also don't get it. And so that kind of, I turned into this weird, like I was like kind of on this weird bed rest, for a really long time. I don't remember how long exactly, but I sat in my bed and I was on the same kind of bed rest that I was on when I broke my knee.
Yeah.
And when I was told that I can't go outside, and like when I was diagnosed, and there's this weird bed rest kind of like you can't move, you need to recover.
Right.
And being in pain, I was in a different kind of pain, and I was in a super big psychological pain, because I was, because although all of the tools to refeed you go like in exact conflict with the eating disorder. So if you don't have like proper therapy,
yep.
it just messes it up and makes it worse. And I was going to a therapist like once a week, but it was just like, I think, and it's also, I had to want to get better. An eating disorder is not something that you can get better by other people treating you.
Yeah. You're
not going to do it unless you get it done. And so it's a really complicated illness. It's really, really hard to do because you know, the treatment and the thing that makes you better is the last thing that you as the patient or as the person with it wants, because you will do anything for the eating disorder, and it's just all of the psychological stuff around it. It's not going to go down without a fight. And if you are nourishing your body, your brain will be like, ah! So your brain and your body, just like, they are in this constant point of conflict. So if you're feeding one but not feeding the other one, you're gonna, you know, it starts to become a really big battleground.
So take us to, and just because I want to make sure that we kind of get here, take us to Sabrina, because you're starting to kind of think about it, or to say it a little bit, but the point where it is you. Take us to the point where you finally have that realization, where it is.
Took a while.
Because I know you had some cycles, right? So we don't have to talk through all the cycles, but tell us, like, when you reach that point, and then I want us to shift to now, right? This is where Sabrina is now, and looking back, what the adults did that worked, and what the adults might consider doing, the next adult who might end up in a similar situation with their kid, right? What they might consider doing.
Totally.
So when did you get there?
It took me to move to college, to experience just like really just dark depression, and the Zoloft made me feel like nothing. And so I think I was, you know, feeding myself, and I was, you know, I just like kind of really lost a lot of control and started indulging in not having any control too. So it took me to reach a point of being in college, of my own, something is wrong, I don't know what to do, I know that this is all going south, because like, just like not dealing with the mental part.
Right.
Because although I was physically recovered, I hadn't really done any of the therapy, and I wasn't doing it willingly either. And so it took me to just like, I think I was just really, really, the dysmorphia was so bad that I didn't want to be in my body at all. So I was just really in a really dark place of living on my own, and like objectively I was doing great. I was a freshman in college, sophomore in college, I had amazing friends and all that stuff, but just like my body was a prison, and I felt very trapped in it. And I think I reached my own personal breaking point of like, it became the man, like just like the really dark feelings of my eating disorder is going to kill me if I don't, if I'm not restricting, it's going to kill me in a different way. And it's, because I wasn't engaging in the restricting, and I was engaging like other disordered eating behaviors, but because I wasn't doing that, it was really like, I had a lot of unconsolidated or unconfronted and really just simmering thoughts. They all just slowly were building up of like the real deep self-worth things. And so I reached a point where I was just like really, really done and really not okay. And I realized that. And I called a doctor on my own and was like, I was seeing a nutritionist, and they were like, hey, maybe you want to go see another doctor. And I talked to this other one, and I'm like, hey, like, I had nowhere to go. So I found a place, a treatment center. And because I identified with having an eating disorder already, I think it would have been really tough too if I hadn't already been diagnosed with one. But I had carried that diagnosis of like, I have recovered from anorexia,
right?
Which I thought was like an end point. But like, I had this significant moment when I was like 18. I was like, I'm recovered because I gained a certain amount of weight, and I, met the numbers that doctors had wanted, but was not there mentally. And I have this tattoo that's like says recovery, and it's like, oh, this is a reminder that I have come past that. I am now in recovery. Like, I am recovered, past tense.
Right.
Not aware that that's a very living and active thing.
Right.
So I was in touch with people with like treatment centers with eating disorder treatment and everything. I ended up just finding a group of I find a facility in Claremont at my school, and I do an over the phone talk because I'm like I'm just like, I don't know what to do. I feel trapped and powerless right now, and I don't have control. And I call them, and they do an over the phone kind of just evaluation, and they're like, yeah, you actually qualify for partial hospitalization. And I was like, what? No way. Right. Which was very scary for me to like think about, because I was really not in that headspace. And so after a while, though, I was like, something I think for a lot of it is that I have a really, really strong central compass. I have a really, really strong, like, there is one tiny little voice that is always there, and it's kind of like, hey, do the right thing.
Okay.
And I think that there's been, like, to almost a spiritual level, and I'm just like, my personal, like, compass is very strong, where like when all is kind of gone, there is enough of like that little tiny, like, hey, you can get through this, you can do this, like something that knows better. So maybe a future self, who knows, somebody who's like, hey, get your head out of the gutter, like,
sure,
do this. So I had that knowledge, and I just knew that I needed to go into to like really deal with it. And I really liked the idea of, I knew that I couldn't do it part-time. It wasn't a part-time job. I also like went to a psychic who was like, you need to, like, there were things that I was like, oh, I think that if I actually care about my future self at all, I need to do this. And I finally like was like, anything is better than this mindset that I'm in right now. Where I am at right now, literally anything is better. And I was like, I felt like I had nothing to lose. So I finally was at that point. And I was like, you know what? Let's do this. Got evaluated, had my feelings validated by doctors, being like, hey, yeah, I know that physically, because I wasn't starving, I wasn't underweight. So in fact, I gained quite a bit of weight, which also triggered a lot of stuff as well.
Yeah.
So the weight gain did trigger a lot of body dysmorphia that never got dealt with. And so I had a really, bad relationship with that. And so I decided to go with, negotiations with my family, go to treatment in Claremont in California. On the other side, my family's in Virginia.
Yeah.
But I went to Claremont and went by myself, moved in with my friend to go to this treatment center. The stars aligned for this place in Claremont called Bright Road Recovery. Shout out to Tamsin, who to this, like, that place is such a haven for me and such a safe haven now. I kind of, like, that was a really pivotal moment where I went to this, I moved in with one of my not even a close friend, but one of my, like, friends that I'd been friends with for a while. And then we later became really close, but was living in this sleepy town. And there were no distractions. I wasn't in a city. I was in a suburb, living by myself, because my family was a very triggering place too, because it was a place of, like, so much conflict, and I had, like, my parents take away my control and everything. So living with them, I was really sure that I wanted to kind of just be on my own, and be away from so many kind of triggers. And so I just went basically to school early and wasn't in school, and hung out at this treatment center. I went every day from 12 to 7 p.m., except for weekends. I would walk there in the morning, walk back at night. I just, like, did every day, did the rounds, and, like, did the things that I hated doing, and, like, really just worked on myself. And it was super, super transformative. And the place was amazing because it was empathetic. It was really small. They were able to get my trust by allowing me to do what I wanted to do. And then also, like, I had a specific amount of freedom because I was only there from 12 to 7. So I wasn't handing over all of my freedom. I would go, on weekends I could do what I wanted. And they just like, there was a really pivotal moment I had when like, and to this day it's like still like every day I have this moment, but I just like remember I was so like, I was like, I need to, because being like restricting and active, like I was a very actively fighting thing. I was like a very like, oh, I need to be actively combating something. I need to sit and actively actively get better, and I have to actively heal, and I have to put in work. And this idea of really active energy and work and labor, and I was like, oh, I need to be doing, I always came in with this idea of it being this conflicting battle. It's like, I'm going in and I'm gonna train I'm gonna work, and that it's this project, and to get better I have to roll up my sleeves and do this work. And so when I get there, they're like, oh no, that's not what we do here. You have to learn to not do that work. Like, you need to learn to just sit and be. And because active controlling energy is what feeds the monster of anorexia. Not like, what really fights it is just sitting and being, and being passive and not controlling anything, and being okay with that. And not being addicted to it, you know. And I was with like 4 other people, all from totally different class background, age. Like, it was a 40-year-old woman and like that 16-year-old, and I was like, girl, I know you. Like, you know, it was so many stages of life, so many class, race, like so much difference, but all so much same. Of course. So much of us all at one day sitting together at a table, all having the exact same issues with our food. Yeah. And like, you know, I credit the smallness of the group. I credit it being in an old colonial house. I credit it feeling so residential and quiet and calm. And I credit the, like, you know, I trusted like that kind of younger, because I, you know, needing role models. Like, it was really hard. Like, I really needed somebody who was helping me get better, that wasn't like in this threat of like, we just want to fatten you up, like, and make you like, because of my negative feelings towards, like, because of my really bad fat phobia, and really internalized, I, you know, needed somebody who like was an idol of like positivity, of like, you can be happy and have a good life, and your worth can be like, you can be of value, doing these things, that didn't go under this guise of like, we're stuffing you like a turkey. And because that's such a common eating disorder fear, I think, just like, it is the fear that all of your worst fears come to life. So having this perspective of these young, kind of cool, like easy, like girls that I was like, oh, like, you're actually like me, you're cool, you're artistic, you know, you're not like this, like, you know, older lady that's like telling me that I gotta take this medicine, and like telling me that I got my BMI has, like, all the doctors I've been with have just been like really weird, or really like uncomfortable, like just not people that I wanted to be like. And so I was like, why would I want to be like you guys?
These
like,
were people you could relate to, that you could see yourself
I related to them, and I they were young, and then there was an older woman, and it was just like people who I wanted to be like, people who were there encouraging me, and they became just a really great family, and people that I never would have imagined myself being close to, and you know, they just really, because as soon as they didn't come at me with a whip of like, you know, do this, do that. It was, oh, you don't feel like doing that? That's okay, you don't have to do it. We'll try again tomorrow. Yeah. There was something about the ritual. I mean, just the whole, and they also were really, really important they were really determined to keep the balance of overall wellness. They had me do yoga for 2 hours. Like, I did yoga, healing, trauma meditation for 2.5 hours, did group therapy, did art therapy, did every form of therapy that went beyond just eating disorder. It went to full on, like, I had a psychiatrist, I had a psychologist, I had a nutritionist, I had group therapy, had group talk, had every form.
So it was the whole self, which makes sense, because what you've described is that your whole self needed healing.
Yeah. It was like finally I was able to consolidate and like come to terms with every form of, it wasn't that we were just working on my body, and we were just working on my diet, or just working on my like trauma. And so it was so gentle, so holistic, and just like really responsive. I also trusted them, because as soon as I expressed a concern, they were able to change things. Nice. I get really frozen up by like, oh, sorry, those are the rules, you can't do it. Right. Sorry, like, policy. sorry, that's how statistics show you have to get better, is by this X number to reach this X number. But when I expressed something, they'd be like, oh, we can change it.
Yeah.
Do you want to do it? They gave me my trust that way through their flexibility.
Yeah.
I think when flexible, I was like, what? And because they were so flexible and so it was just great. I was able to really, it was tough. Obviously, it was very hard.
So what I hear you describing, Sabrina, is you got to a point where you had some, cycles, if you will, in your teen years that centered around the anorexia and the.
My parents stepped back. At this point, I was living by myself.
Yeah, you had to get to the point yourself, and then find the place for you. So here's what I want to do.
They knew. My parents knew. They knew that was going to take me until then, and they were like, "Yeah, we knew you were dealing with it, but you needed to bring yourself there."
Yeah,
and it was true. Like, I needed to go and be like, "Hey, I need to go do this for me." I needed nobody. Like, as soon as somebody told me, I probably wasn't going to do it.
Well, here's what you said. Here's the quote that struck me. Here's what you said. You said that little voice that you carry, your compass, as you described it. You said to yourself, if you care about your future self at all, you have to do this. And and then what you've done that is control. You've taken control and said, I can control that I'm going to do this because I care enough about my future self to do it. Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's huge.
Yeah.
So do this for us then. Look back, we've got another 5 minutes or so. Look back and think about, especially the adults in your life, whether they were parents or teachers or friends of parents of friends or whatever, right? The adults in your life, what are, if you had to name a couple, right, of things that they did that were instrumental in supporting you. It didn't solve the problem in the moment, right? Because you had cycles, which is very normal. Yeah. Or normal is the wrong word, typical. But they did. And again, like I said, looking back, if I were a parent now who had a child struggling with similar issues, what might you suggest that I consider that maybe the adults in your world didn't know, right? Because that's a big part of this is we don't know. So what do you think?
Absolutely. I think like to note is that my parents, as soon as something happened, they prioritized my health over everything. Yeah. Even when I didn't want to prioritize my health.
Yeah.
So when I specifically was against that, they made it such a priority that was the finite thing. And they made that clear to me. And to this, every action that they took was with my health as a priority.
Yeah.
And my safety.
Yeah.
And that, even when I really didn't want it.
Sure.
And them doing that was so crucial. Them acting as soon as they could. It took longer. I mean, with my brother now, I props, they went as soon as they realized that it's, he might be anxious. It's they were like, we're not going through this again.
Yep.
And, it takes practice.
Yeah.
And I gave them a lot of practice. I was a very tough child.
Sure.
Which hopefully it's paying back now. I get to be on podcasts. Give cool talks to people, and I'm gonna make it worth it to them eventually.
Amen.
But hopefully I'm a little bit less of a burden now. But they prioritized that, and they made it really clear of that unconditional element. They also kept, really that inner voice was kind of allowed to kind of manifest. I think from my parents, I got this idea that I could do amazing things. I could plan my future, and this idea of dreaming and of storytelling and learning stories from my family. Like, my dad has this amazing, my great grandmother actually just tattooed one of the words on my foot is I sat at the dinner table and was given that kind of intuitive freedom. I was given the freedom of my mind. I was given the freedom to do whatever I wanted with my head. I could dream about jobs. I could tell stories. That creative freedom that they gave me ended up being this truly saving grace that they, allowed me to have for such a long time. I was able to do what I wanted. They made it really clear that I could be in control of my future.
I love it.
And that's the part that that's what you were saying with that little voice was hey, you got to do better, is because although I wasn't given control over a lot of things, I was given the ability that I could do whatever I wanted. with my life.
Okay.
And that was just like became a streamline. I just remember I had like a really clear, when things got tough, I would think about and like plan for this, like this eventual, like, you know, I think the traditional definition of hope,
right,
where I was just like, I could see this like kind of person that I wanted to be really far on. And they allowed me the freedom to create that person from a very young age.
Love that.
That freedom, oh, maybe you want to be an artist, maybe you want to do this, maybe, and they just like really fed that. And they fed this, not the, you need to be studying this.
Right.
They were not cracking a whip on my brain. They did not crack a whip on, you need to be they didn't try to control my head.
Okay.
And they, because of that, and because of the kind of like free creative like families, they, you know, they just allowed for that, you know, brain curiosity. They allowed for a lot of that stuff. And there was a lot of hope, and also just like love and affection, but also my just exposure to being able to do a lot of things was really big.
Okay.
Like I really do credit like the fact that I have 4 parents who all got to do different things, and they were 2 very strong women in my life. That became a huge motivator. People in my life. I'm trying to think if there are more like, I mean, because just like my parents' career played such a crucial role.
No, that makes so much sense. And Sabrina, that's really helpful, because I think those are some really powerful messages for parents to hear, you know, that even when your kid is saying no,
I knew
that you do it.
I knew that there were certain things that I did like deep down, but they enabled that stuff. They didn't try to take away. They didn't try to control those, like, you know, I just have distinct memories of sitting at the dinner table and listening to them tell these really amazing stories of our families or of them. And I was exposed to so much. I was exposed to a lot of things that made it feel like I had options and like I had that freedom.
Yeah.
So I was exposed to a lot of freedom in different ways. And maybe it wasn't in, you know, my physical body, but it was in my head body, my head.
So what's important about that?
Like
let me point out that one piece. Here's what's important about that. There's a lot that's important about it, but what I love about what you're saying right now is now we're kind of speaking about the parenting space in general, right? So your parents, all 4 of them, right, did those things just as a part of how you all operated as a family. They weren't in response, oh my gosh, Sabrina's in crisis, we need to sit down and tell stories about our family. That's how they operated as parents, and you guys operated as a family unit. And because of those healthy pieces, they were supporting you even as you were experiencing trauma without having identified that you were experiencing trauma. So how important just the day-to-day healthiness, if you will, of a family is in a situation like that. Okay, that's good.
I mean, daily rituals and like that was where my stability was. Like, you know, I was seeking for stability, and I found stability in like in other elements of my family. Like your body will, like, you'll find those things. And so the more outlets that you have for that, the more like kind of places that I'm allowed to put that is like great. So I had like a limited amount where I could place those things, but I could still place them somewhere really, really important. And it was like those daily, definitely like those daily rituals. And I mean, to this day, when I was like, I did have like my mom, when I was sick, had such a nurturing kind of, you know, she sat and watched That's a Raven with me while I was on bed rest, you know, suffered through those things, but allowed me to feel safe there. And made me feel, giving me the feeling of safety was, you know, although a lot of times it was difficult or unsuccessful, they did their absolute best, and they were able to create senses of safety and trust. And, you know, but it took a while, and it's now like hindsight 2020 where I'm like, I should have trusted you. It is very true though that they, you know, they enabled that security, that safety. You know, my best, you know, memories are just like in them being like, hey, bottom line is this. We care about you, we love you, we won't, like, and not in and just not in a condescending way, of them like letting me have space and not you know, when they controlled one element of my life, they were not controlling another element of my life. And I was able to do my own thing in this element, as long as like there was that balance that they did their best to do and maintain. And I think like that, I mean, for me, it's like to this day, is like I think my greatest gifts is like flexibility and being able to transition into super challenging or different or changing spaces, you know, going back and forth between both parents, transitioning from having one person tell me one thing to another person, and like my ability to get along with a lot of different people, my ability to just really fluidly fit in with a group is from this kind of just exposure to so many different people. For them, exposure to so many ideas, just like that balance of, you know, tightening it with like, hey, we care about your health, that's the priority, and then not trying to tighten it in another. Like as soon as they tightened it in one realm, they would let it go in another realm.
They could give you some space in the other realm.
Able to always,
they could give you some space and some control in the
other realm. I was super just able to have, in the places that they let me have space are the places that I'm like really thriving off of.
Well, given where you are right now, right? So here's a final kind of takeaway for me that I'm hearing you say, right? So, and then I'm going to give you like a minute to just like final word, whether you want it to be about like a suggestion for people, whether you just want it to be on a lesson learned, whatever it is. But one of the takeaways for me from what you're saying right now is that one of the hard parts is, you know, parents, people listening to this podcast can take what they will away from your experience and the ways the adults in your life responded to the experience, etc. But for you, being the person who was in the place of having, you know, experiencing trauma over time, you can look back now and see what in the moment, it's probably almost impossible, right? In the moment to know and understand it, but to be able to look back as a part of your own healing process and be able to identify, this is why I was able to get to this point where I'm healing, right? These are the things that contributed to that. That's huge. So final word for you, my friend.
Oh, I don't know what a final word is. I feel like I know that I miss things, and I think I spend a lot of time, especially now in isolation, you know, thinking about my feelings.
You do.
But I will say, if I had not done every single thing of those that happened, the good and the bad, it's so incredibly crucial to who I am today. And it, you know, I am just like incredibly grateful for the therapy that I've been able to go to. Any parent who's like, don't go to therapy, sorry, I disagree. I deeply disagree with you.
Yeah.
And like those, any stereotypes, I think, were the things that, you know, bring it down. Because I had that on myself already. But yeah, everything that has happened, I'm super grateful for now, especially in isolation. I sit here now with the toolkit, knowing that I can always go home to my family.
That's it.
I know that I have dealt with this so many times. I'm sitting here and I've got I'm basically here with my mental health survival kit. And I know how to do it. And I've done it before. And I'm probably the most prepared person for quarantine at this moment.
I bet you
where
are.
I am so I'm being really functional in new ways, and I'm confident in my ability to adapt and to always, like, my doctor the other day was like, "You're a survivor, aren't you?" Like, indeed I am.
Absolutely.
And I'm able to handle things. I'm so self-aware now too. Well, maybe to a fault, but yeah. I spend a lot of time reflecting on my life. For good and for bad, and a lot of time being like, oh, if that hadn't happened, I would not be, like, I have it, like, it gets down to the things of like, do you know what the chances are that you were even born?
Right.
Like, I get very deep and metaphysical and like all of that things now where I'm at, but yeah, every single action I was taking, I'm super grateful for, and I'm you know, would not be who I am without having gone through all those things. And my main thing was like, you know, in the moment to be as responsive, and follow, like, to this day now, where like my mom like will have a good line of like, hey, what does your gut say?
Yeah. And,
you know, bring it back home to like what actions, like knowing myself. I don't know. I don't want to get too like, you know, abstract or anything.
No, I love.
Yeah, I try to have as much gratitude as I can.
Nice.
Now.
Yeah.
The hardest thing is like sitting and doing the therapy and getting on the phone with people, and it's so easy to like fall back in. But when I gotta kind of learn to hack my brain a little bit. But it 100% would not be if it wasn't for like my parents making it so explicitly clear of their support.
Yeah.
And I know, like, and then I think it made it so that even if if they made the wrong choice, I knew that they made the wrong choice in the right headspace.
Yeah.
And now I can look back and be like, I know that you might have done that thing, or like this might have not gone as we planned, or you know, you couldn't trust that, but I know that deep down you didn't do it in a way to control me, or in a way that, you know, was in any other interest other than me thriving later on. And so we all kind of had this collective goal for my kind of this, and also like that hope of a future self being super amazing. And then like that idea of like your dreams as a kid, when you're like given dreams, it's quite good. It's quite good to be able to dream about things. Because now I'm like able to do that, and I'm living alone in California, and I'm, you know, giving my capstone presentation on, you know, I got covered by some cool news people. Like things have been good, and I've been able to channel all my art and all my work towards writing my own story. And I should try to share that with as many people as I can. So.
And that story is just beginning. And you know what, I just, on behalf of, you know, I always joke, I don't know if 5 people are going to hear this or 500, but whoever does, you know, thank you so much for, you know, for sharing and for being willing to kind of open up about your experience. And don't be surprised if I, you know, look for a reason to have another conversation with you in your future.
I feel like there's so many things I'm like, ooh, I remember I wrote to you so many things that I want to say to like a younger self, but I feel like that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other, we're going to have the younger self conversation later.
And I'm like, there's like, if there was a young teenager listening to this, like I need to like just start my own podcast of like, hey.
That's exactly right. I love it. I love it.
I want a dear younger me and a dear body.
There you go.
I want to do two different ones. So,
I love it. All right, you heard it here first, everybody. Look for those podcasts from Sabrina. Thanks so much, Sabrina. All right, folks. So right out of the gate, I think we achieved what we set out to achieve. I think we said, you know, in the intro before we went into this interview, we wanted to set this up so that Sabrina simply had a platform to tell her story. And, you know, one of the things that's so important to me about this podcast is that these are just real people, right? You know, like we said in the intro, or when I introduced her, you know, she happens to be the daughter of someone who happened to be a Faster Way client of mine. And she's an example of millions and millions of people out there who have, you know, stories just like hers. So out of the gate, I loved that she grabbed me anyway by drilling into this concept of trauma. Her distinction of understanding that she's someone who has experienced trauma versus being someone with a label, right? And some sort, and how that made it easier for her. I love that. It was really powerful for me to hear her kind of break down how critical it was for her to come to know like what her relationship was with the things that happened to her over time, right? Not just what had happened, but what her relationship was. And to having to be told by her therapist that she needed trauma therapy because she didn't identify herself in that light, right? Like, I thought that was such a huge piece for everybody, because you look at it kind of past tense and you can put it together, but in the moment, right? Oh, well, lots of people have conditions, or lots of people go through divorce, or so anyway, it really drilled home for me, Melissa. It's where that adverse childhood experience, or ACE assessment, comes in, that Michelle and Lisa introduced us to, that using a tool like that helps a person understand their experience versus saying, okay, what happened, and then we can decide if it was trauma or not. And then I'm going to add, and then I want to hear from you, Melissa, to just that how powerful it was to listen to Sabrina almost kind of recreate her experiences, right, from when she was so young. I felt like I was getting a sense of what it was like to be her, right? Yes. And gosh, you know, just the journey itself was incredibly moving for me. So what are some of the things that were important to you?
Well, one of the things you started off with was the idea of the label. And the impact of the label. You know, we hear all the time people who say, you know, I don't want to be labeled. I don't want, like, you know, it could be rape victims or cancer survivors or whatever. They don't want to be the victim. They want to be seen as the individual. They don't want that label slapped on them, because that's, you know, people may treat them differently, or it may make them feel some kind of way. To hear her apply that same reasoning to trauma really resonated with me, because I'm like, you know, especially, and I keep going back to this, I know, but I think it's probably one of the most important points that we'll take out of all of this, is that trauma is different for every single person. What it is, how it impacts you, what determines whether or not you've been, you know, traumatized, the whole nine. So to hear someone who's been through traumatic events, or over time have dealt with trauma over time, to hear them say, I didn't want to be seen as the person who was enduring trauma. I just wanted to be me going through what I'm going through and getting healthy. That really helped to put all of it in perspective for me, in that we have to treat every person as if, even the ones who seem super strong on the other end of it, even the ones who recognize, like, everybody is going to display it differently, and you can't tell by just looking at someone. So the label doesn't help them or us, in all honesty. We do need to just get away from the label and view and hear and help one another, so that we understand, this whole thing with trauma. I thought that was really powerful, coming from her, specifically coming from her, someone who had gone through it. And I thought hearing her whole story was extremely powerful, especially having heard her mother's take on what had happened. I found myself throughout it recognizing, like, that's what her mom said. Yeah, that's what her mom said. Ooh, her mother didn't see it like that. I found myself doing that. And I was hoping that her mom was listening, or that her mom will listen and hear that she absolutely recognizes that even if it didn't work, you tried because you loved her. That's what matters. And I know that Charlotte expressed some some regrets in our last talk. She had some things that she wasn't sure she had done right. It doesn't matter. It's that you did them, and that she saw you do them, and she noticed and recognized that you were doing them because you loved her from a place of purity. I thought that was beautiful as well, because sometimes when we're in the midst of it, we don't know how the other person is. All of our attempts to help, we don't know how they're going to be received, or whether they understand our motives and our reasoning. You and I have had talks about dealing with teenage kids. Sometimes you have to put your foot down, and you don't know if they're going to recognize that you're doing it for their own good. She recognized it, even if it was later. She recognized it, so that was great. I had like two other main points. The first was, I love that she talked about how having space to be creative was helpful to her. Especially in a world sometimes where the arts are trashed, or the first thing to be cut when we need funding money or whatever. To know that creativity is being used in a way that can help heal is important.
I agree.
And I hope parents who are listening, who may have children who've been through trauma or are going through trauma, I hope they recognize that is a space that can be given.
That's it.
Where they can have some freedom to just be whatever they want to be in a creative way. Because I heard Sabrina saying over and over that this was a lot about control for her. And to have a lot of that control taken from her in an attempt to help heal her, that she still needed something that she could control, that was for her, that she could decide. And to know that it was creativity is just, as a creative myself, I just absolutely love that message.
Well, and she quickly, she said specifically, in my childhood eyes, it was like I literally had control over nothing. That was so powerful.
And I think we as parents, we forget that sometimes. Because we, as we've talked about often, that struggle to be the person in control, the one that makes the rules. They have to listen to me because I'm the adult. Like, they still are little humans, and they want to feel like they can make some decisions and choices and have some kind of rule over their own lives. And if you can do it even in the space of just allowing them to be creative, it's a lot more powerful than I think we as parents think about way too often. The last thing was that I thought, or that I hope a lot of people took away from this. She said in her own words, writing my own story. And I wrote that down and underlined it about 20 times because I think we have got to allow people to do that more often. To tell their stories in their own words. We have to stop trying to superimpose our thoughts and our opinions and our feelings onto other people's experiences. As you mentioned, our preconceived notions, our thoughts on what it should be like. We have to get out of that and just let people tell their stories
Yeah.
and learn from them that way.
Yeah.
It's the best gift, I think, that those of us who are trying to support someone, I think that's the best gift we can give them.
Yeah.
Is allowing them to tell their story like that. We all like to tell our own story. So I thought that was powerful. And I'm just really grateful to her for sharing.
Yeah.
Because I know that's not always an easy thing to do when you have to dredge up. I mean, she went back to 4
Yeah.
to tell us
all
her
the way
story.
back there.
And 4 all the way back to 4 to a painful memory.
Yes.
Of being diagnosed with something and the rarity of it. I mean, all of that. It's powerful and it's difficult.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful to her for doing that for us.
Yeah,
I
couldn't echo that any stronger. I think you're absolutely right. And it did reinforce what Michelle and Lisa said about how much we can remember from such a young age.
Yes.
I wouldn't expect a 4-year-old to remember the feelings, right? That to the extent that she does. And of course, she's done some work, right? So she's had to dig in, but it really makes you think about that when they're at certain age. I think up until a lot older than that, we tend to be like, oh, they're young, they won't remember this. Oh,
They won't remember.
And Michelle and Lisa said it's in their brain whether they can recall it or not, right? She also really reinforced for me again this whole. Every episode, they've reinforced it independent of one another. This idea that no two people can experience something the same, and that we can't compare. I loved early on. She was like the whole like, well, that's not that bad. Like I think, oh, my parents got divorced. Well, big deal. Lots of parents get divorced. Or I have this condition. Well, lots of people have stuff. It was great to hear her as someone who's lived it to really express that. And it was funny because actually yesterday. It just so happens my daughter's boyfriend, we were having this conversation. He asked me what I thought has the most influence over people, nurture versus nature. And it was kind of amazing, really, to respond knowing how much of this series has influenced my thinking. And ultimately, I just said, I really think it's 50-50. I think that nurture has such a huge influence. And where Sabrina really hammered that home is when she talked to us about the things that her family did, the traditions they held, the storytelling, the things they did together that were patterns for her, that were the healthy parts, that were the things that she could hang on to, and that were good for her. I mean, here's a kid who, lots of times, I hate to say it, but I do think that sometimes we rush to judgment that if a kid has experienced trauma, something must be wrong with the parents, right?
Absolutely.
And Sabrina really brings it home when she says, I had, my parents divorced early. I had 4 parents. I have 4 parents, all of whom are incredible people and bring something very different to my healing. And so what they demonstrated is that you can have these hard things happen and still be a healthy family who now has to support their child as they're, responding to these hard things. So anyway, the nature versus nurture, it's like, okay, in my mind, the nurture piece is huge. She talks about her family and that nurture piece and how significant it was. And yet the nature piece is significant too, because even from what we know of Michelle and Lisa, right, just literally how our brains are comprised, creates a fundamental difference in us and how we experience life in general. So that was really thought-provoking for me. Yeah.
That's exactly right. She actually mentioned when she was talking about that, how she had to come to the realization that people can feel the same emotion just as intensely from totally different events.
Yes.
And she was like, profound sadness, you can feel sadness from many different things. And when you think of it in that context, like, I don't know that we should need to explain that any further. Of course, that's true.
Yep.
I might be profoundly sad because of this reason and you for that reason, but we're both feeling profound sadness.
Yes.
And that was really eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
When she said that, I scribbled that down too, like intensely feel.
Yeah.
For different reasons. Like that is the absolute truth. It's the beauty of being human is that we're all so much alike but so different. And she said that about the group that she first started dealing with when she went away to the place that helped her.
Yep.
And she talked about how there were, all different types of people with all kinds of experiences and on the surface, everyone looks different.
Yeah.
But at the core of us, we're not as different as we think we are.
Yep.
And that just, all of that is like all of these, she dropped so many little jewels like that throughout the conversation. But the one other thing I really wanted to touch on, Janice, was she mentioned she has a toolkit.
Yeah.
And I thought about that from the perspective of someone trying to support a person,
yes,
or a child or anything. Like, try to help them develop those tools,
yeah,
so they have them.
Yep.
Because she mentioned she's in a whole nother state, away from her family, if I'm not mistaken, across the country.
She's here in California.
From her
folks
family.
are in Virginia.
So she needs them, because she won't have a person right there all the time. So she's got these tools that she can use, and I thought that was great. So I would say, ask, how you can help build someone's toolkit so that they can make it through whatever it is they're going through when they need to. I just thought that was important to point out.
And how important that her parents had the courage to allow her, right? I mean, you could say she was an adult that couldn't stop her, but we have influence. And she knew, fundamentally, she knew she had to be this far away to solve it. Because she, that's another powerful message for her parents. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. And she was in her early 20s when she finally got that treatment. 19, 20 years old when she got that treatment that finally put her on the path that she's on right now. And she had to go across the country and live there by herself for a year to figure out that she needed it, right? And to get to that point. And I want to reinforce the thing you said a few minutes ago, and then I'll offer a final thought for us, and that is that that we have to be able to listen to people's stories and take what we can from it, and not necessarily interpret it, because our instinct is hear it, interpret it so it makes sense to us, and then and it's not that we can necessarily turn that instinct off, but to recognize that the moment we do that, it's not their story anymore. It's our interpretation of their story.
That's right.
So it's really key to me, I can certainly say, as a mom and an educator, to look at Sabrina's story and see that the collection of challenging experiences that and eventually that those that led to her to experiencing anxiety and eventually becoming anorexic. In other words, it wasn't the one thing, like we keep saying about trauma. It was a collection of things that happened over time that slowly started, and she talks about it early on, about like this seed of anxiety, this seed of feeling no control, and that everything that happened next, like just put a little water on that seed and put a little more water on that seed. So again, I think for me as a mom and an educator, it was really making me think that, I have to really think about like the previous learning from Michelle and Lisa on how to, support children who've experienced trauma. And you kind of got to that again here too, when you said, what's the toolkit? They didn't use the word toolkit, but in episodes 9 and 10, they gave us lots of resources that we could put in that toolkit. So that's a great place for folks to go back to. But it makes me realize at an even deeper level how absolutely essential it is for adults who influence kids to be paying close attention, to follow our guts, to get our kids support, to err on the side of caution, right? Better our kids get support they didn't really need than to suffer in silence, so to speak, with no support, right? Because we listened to somebody else who said you're overreacting or what have you. But to really, in the moment, reflect on the last year, the last 3 years, the last 5 years. What are the things that have happened, and to acknowledge that it doesn't have to have been a traumatic event, but how is my kid experiencing the things that happen over life? Some of the very natural things that just are part of life for our kids. And what's the support I need to be seeking for them? What's the evidence I should be looking for that they need support? And then how do I go about getting it? So anyway, so folks, it was our intention to, in the beginning, I was going to do an episode on trauma. And then I met Michelle and Lisa and realized, wait a second, this is a series. And then from there, this series grew. So I would encourage you, of course, Melissa and I both would, that you go back to episode 9, you listen to all 4 episodes, and certainly that you share them, because I can't think of anybody who would listen to this podcast who doesn't influence kids in their life in some way, who couldn't benefit from hearing the messages. I do want to thank Michelle and Lisa again for starting us off in the series. I want to thank Charlotte and Sabrina, of course, mother and daughter, for being willing to be open and vulnerable with us and to share their stories. And I have no doubt this is all going to lead to future episodes and who knows what. Sabrina's got an incredibly unique story, Melissa, so I know we'll be talking to her again at some point about something. But, absolutely. But for now, folks, we are also wrapping up season 1 of Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case, because when we started, I said we're going to do 12 episodes in a season. So we're going to take May off, because in May we're going to be crafting season 2 and beginning the recording for season 2. And the goal is for season 2 then to start right at the beginning of June. So spend the next 4 weeks going back through some of the episodes. We'll be posting, of course, some of the episodes to encourage you to go back to them, and really kind of promoting, etc., and sharing, making sure you go to that YouTube page and subscribe. For now, be well, stay healthy, and then meet us back here on June 4th for the beginning of season 2 of Somebody Asked Me with Janice Case, and we'll get to it.